Al-Ghazali further discusses the issue of philosophy and the issue of rational theology in his magnum opus Ihya al-Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences. And he says, فَعْلَمْ, then know, أَنَّ لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا غُلُوًّا, that for the people, for the masses, for the scholars, there is in this topic غُلُوًّا, extremism and over-exaggeration, وَإِسْرَافًا فِي أَطْرَافٍ, and exaggeration in various paths and various ways. Meaning, people go to extremes in this matter and they end up over-exaggerating regarding the nature of Kalam, of rational theology and philosophy in relation to the religion. And he mentions that some said, إِنَّهُ بِدْعَةٌ وَحَرَامٌ, indeed it is a innovation and it is impermissible or prohibited. وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ أَن يَلْقَى اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ ذَنْبٍ سِوَى الشِّرْكِ خَيْرٌ لَهُ مِنْ أَن يَلْقَاهُ بِالْكَلَامِ, and that indeed the servant, meaning a person, that he meet God with every sin other than polytheism, associating partners with God, that is better for him than that he meets God with kalam, with rational theology. This is the same statement that Ash-Shafi'i made, and Al-Ghazali in fact critiques this statement, interestingly enough, despite the fact that he himself is a Shafi'i. وَمِنْ قَائِلٍ, and from those who speak in this topic, there are those who say, إِنَّهُ فَرْضٌ, indeed it is obligatory, إِمَّا عَلَى الْكِفَايَةِ, either upon the collective whole, meaning the Muslims as a collective, وَإِمَّا عَلَى الْأَعْيَانِ, or either upon individuals, meaning it is obligatory upon each and every Muslim individual to learn this science. وَإِنَّهُ أَفْضَلُ الْعِبَادَاتِ, indeed it is the most superior of forms of worship. وَأَكْمَلُ الْقُرْبَاتِ, and the most complete forms of attaining closeness to God. فَإِنَّهُ تَحْقِيقٌ لِعِلْمِ التَّوْحِيدِ, then indeed it is a completion and research and testification of the truthfulness for the knowledge of Tawheed and the knowledge of the oneness of God. Al-Ghazali here attempts to take a more moderate position, he attempts to take a more nuanced position, and he critiques both those who say that it is outright an innovation and it is prohibited, meaning rational theology, and at the same time he also critiques those who say that it is obligatory and that it is the best forms of worship. Just as a side note here, many scholars have also mentioned that it is rather recommended, and some have mentioned that it is simply permissible to study Ilmul Kalam, the science of rational theology. قال, and Al-Ghazali said, وَإِلَى التَّحْرِيمِ, and towards prohibition, ذهب الشافعي, Ash-Shafi'i went, meaning Ash-Shafi'i took the position of the prohibition of Ilmul Kalam, of rational or speculative theology. وَمُحَمَّدٌ, and Muhammad, I suspect that he's referring to Muhammad Ash-Shaybani. وَمَالِكٌ, and Malik, the Imam of Medina. وَأَحْمَدُ بْنُ حَنْبَلٍ, and Ahmad bin Hanbal. وَسُفْيَانُ, and Sufyan. وَجَمِيعُ أَئِمَّةِ الْحَدِيثِ مِنَ السَّلَفِ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ, and a large group or a big group of the scholars of hadith, of prophetic narrations from the Salaf, from the pious predecessors, radiyallahu anhum. Al-Ghazali says, may God be pleased with them. So, despite the fact that Al-Ghazali himself engaged in rational or speculative theology, he acknowledged the fact that many early traditionalist scholars in fact did say that it was prohibited. This reflects a very big tension between early scholarship and latter scholarship. The Khalaf, the successors to the Salaf, the pious predecessors, they predominantly engaged in Kalam, and they engaged in many practices which the Salaf may have deemed as prohibited or innovative in nature. However, it's important to note that Al-Ghazali did not view ilm al-kalam in its essence as being impermissible or permissible, but rather, as has been mentioned in his works, that he viewed it in relation to its possibility of benefiting and its possibility of causing harm, insofar as it may lead to skepticism and misguidance, but it may also lead to guidance and uncovering of truth. This also reflects the tension between Athari Sunnism and Ash'ari and Maturidi Sunnism. The Atharis, those who adopted the more traditionalist or textual approach, typically opposed the usage of ilm al-kalam, of rational or speculative theology. On the other hand, the Ash'aris and Maturidis used to employ it. It's important to note that even though the Atharis, especially the likes of Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi, were very heavily opposed to ilm al-kalam and rational theology, and they opposed it very heavily, and they quite heavily censored the likes of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. At the same time, many Atharis did indeed end up engaging in philosophy and ilm al-kalam, rational theology, in order to combat the attacks, the theological, philosophical and intellectual attacks presented on Islamic creed. In fact, Ibn Taymiyyah himself does engage in rational theology, and he does engage in philosophy very often. In fact, even more often than many of the opponents he critiques for using philosophy and rational theology. And he also mentions the narration of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that هلك المتنطعون أي المتعمقون في البحث, meaning those who delve into quarrels and disputations regarding religious creed, and those who delve into deep matters of theology, those who engage in them in a very deep manner, whilst they are not required to do so according to the religion, those people shall perish. Al-Ghazali then goes on to summarize his position by saying that in it, meaning in rational or speculative theology, is benefit, and in it is harm. Then it is with regards, meaning it is in relation to its benefit in the time of its benefiting, then it is either permissible or recommended or obligatory. Meaning when it has the ability to benefit a person, it will either be permissible or recommended or obligatory, depending on how badly this science is needed to defend his belief, to defend a person's belief. كما يقتضيه الحال, as the state of the person, as the state of the times indicates it. And then he mentions that in terms of its harm, in that time which it could cause harm, meaning when there's a potentiality of it causing harm to a person's belief, then it becomes impermissible. He also mentions another interesting statement, that it may be that misguidance is more common due to this study of rational speculative theology than uncovering and knowing of the truth. This reflects a common sentiment within many orthodox Sunni theologian circles, that despite ilm al-kalam, rational theology, being a useful tool, despite rational speculative theology being viewed as a useful tool, it was still recognized and acknowledged that it may cause harm to a person's belief if delved into too deeply, or if not grounded within sound understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah. Again, one could disagree with this methodology or approach, and one, especially within modern times, might struggle to understand this approach as it's not fully rational, at least according to the modern worldview. Yet this makes sense from a religious perspective, as the whole point, the purpose of life is to worship God, and the purpose of life is to believe in God, and our rational faculties and rational tools should primarily and fundamentally be used to defend religious belief and not to go against religious belief. And so if the intellectual tools that we use to defend religious belief, if they may end up leading to misguidance from religious orthodoxy, then those tools should be treated with caution and with a nuanced understanding of the possible harms they may cause to one's faith. Ali al-Qari goes on to mention that what can be understood from the speech of some of the pious predecessors was that the reason for their censoring, the reason for their condemning this knowledge is due to the taking of principles for this knowledge which do not relate to the Islamic faith and which bear no reality on a person's faith, and which a person is not legally in the Islamic faith responsible to know those things, and he simply takes them up for the purpose of argumentation.